68. Leaders prioritize what they want. Once upon a time, the teacher filled a jar with large stones and asked the students whether the jar was full or not. The students replied that it was. Then the teacher added few pebbles and shook the jar. The pebbles settled in between the spaces of the large stones. Then the teacher asked whether now the jar was full or not. The students replied it was. Then the teacher added sand and shook the jar. The sand settled wherever it could find any space. Then the teacher asked whether now the jar was full or not. The students replied it was. Thereafter, the teacher emptied the jar. Then he put the sand first inside the jar, which settled at the base of the jar. He asked the students whether the jar was full or not. The students replied that the jar was not full, as the sand was only at the base. Then the teacher added pebbles, which settled on top of the sand. Again, he asked the students whether the jar was full or not. The students replied it was not, as there was still some space left over the pebbles. Then the teacher added the large stones in the jar. Only 1 or 2 stones could go inside as there was no space left. Then the teacher asked whether the jar was full or not. The students replied that the jar was full, but since some large stones could not be put inside it, so in this sense, the jar was not full. The teacher said, "The jar represents your life. The large stones represent your family, your health, etc. The pebbles represent your career, your job, etc. The sand represents all the small things that you do in life. Now, if you start filling the jar with large stones first, it will always remain full. But if you start filling the jar with sand first, then it will not be always full. So, one must concentrate on filling the jar first with the large stones and then the pebbles and then the sand. One must concentrate first on the family, health, education, etc., and then the job, career, house, car, etc., and lastly the other small things of life.